Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, Western values. A lot of people often bring this up. And people like Sydney Watson, as I mentioned, have been going more and more on a rampage against Islam. And I hear a lot about how they say Islam is incompatible with Western values. And I thought to myself, as someone who's born in America, 90s kid, Disney baby, McDonald's baby, why not examine our own culture and see what is the truth and what are modern Western values? Because clearly, classical Americana 17th century values are not in play at all today by the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party. And I hope that this series that I'm going to do lays that out quite clearly for people. Alright, so, intoxicants are a Western value, okay? And the American Western value system does not value sobriety. It does not value sober minds. How do we know this? Well, examine how many people run from their own consciousness and grew up with lots of trauma and seek intoxicants as a form of therapy, as a way to cope with their realities. Alcohol is an intoxicant that is sold in many stores, restaurants, and is heavily promoted in the adult entertainment industry with shows like Girls Gone Wild. Sororities push it in college. People often tell stories about how they went to a lot of frat parties and got completely plastered, okay? If you go to a baby shower, there's champagne. You go to a wedding, there's alcohol. And California has Napa Valley. The upper echelons of society enjoy their wines. And if you hang around liberals who are of the upper middle class, you will begin to see more and more of wine culture. And then in the lower middle class, you hear a lot about beers and breweries and things like that. And then in both, you'll hear about brandy and gin, stuff like that, from the older male generation. And so, no matter which way you square it, their intoxicants are embedded in the culture. I go on Pinterest, I always try to press hide the alcohol ads, but it's pushed. On trucks, they're allowed to advertise, Modelo, Tecate, Pacifico, Corona beers, right? So, even when your kids are going somewhere, they're gonna see alcohol advertisements. They go in the store, alcohol. There are lots of families, such as mine, who have been ravaged by alcohol, okay? Even worse is now, you have people on Adderall, they vape, they smoke weed, and they will drink alcohol. So their minds are lambasted with tons of layers of intoxicants that take them out of this reality. America values a drunken mind, a mind that is high, either on pills, cannabis, temporary with a little tobacco, because tobacco, from my understanding, doesn't last very long, but it's that need, that euphoria they get. There are tons of people on fentanyl now, and when it comes to the opioids, there's the painkillers, and then there's the antidepressants, and then there's the SSRIs and stuff. So even that has a manifold problem, okay? You look at now also people between the ages of like 15 to 25, they're smoking a lot of weed, eating a lot of edibles, and we're noticing more and more now people can't stand being sober. So America, a Western value, is alcohol. Italy and France, notorious for drinking. Wine is one of their specialties. It's a feature of their nation. When you think of France and you think of Italy, you think of wine. So in America, that is the same case. So in Islam, we are forbidden from taking intoxicants. We are to endure our sufferings with gracious patience. And that actually makes us quite formidable and better parents. Americans love intoxicants so much that some women, they will still drink alcohol while breastfeeding. They'll find tons of doctor shopping, right? They'll go, oh, can I drink alcohol? So they, oh, just one glass. Can I smoke a blunt? So these women are smoking blunts and drinking alcohol while breastfeeding because they are so eager to get high and get tipsy out when they're finally done with their pregnancy. So they can't even parent sober. This is how addicted the women are in America, especially. There are a new class of women who they have to run away from their own soul, run away from their own mind, practice escapism. They cannot confront the darkness of themselves and wrestle with their inner turmoil. So we are weaker. Not me, I'm sober. But we as Americans are a weaker nation because we cripple our people with intoxicants. Now, since we have a culture that loves alcohol, they love to get high. Now you have people pushing mushrooms. Joe Rogan pushes all kinds of drugs. When his interview with Cat Williams that he just did, he said all drugs should be legal, and that if you get pure fentanyl and you learn how to use it and you watch someone overdose, you'll learn how to manage your addiction properly, and you should be free to use drugs. And so he's a heavy proponent. He's a liberal, and he's a heavy proponent of people getting high. And he's always high on his show. So if you compare when he does Sober October, how he interacts with his guests and how he is, he's not the same when he's sober. So he has to get high in order to be entertaining for his audience, which is quite sad. And you watching him smoke makes you want to smoke. And he's one of the top American podcasters. So America values getting high, okay? And when a Muslim man and woman are sober and strong, this frightens and intimidates the weakened, enslaved addict, because you are a light while they're festering in their darkness. You make them uncomfortable. You make them encounter their inability to navigate this earth sober. There is something to be said about Karl Marx's bread and circuses theory, where the populace is kept in a state of stupor and is kept entertained to too far an extent, to where they don't start making social change. And we can see that the way brains are becoming eroded, more and more children are being born with birth defects and crippling mental illness, and we have to wonder about the wombs they are growing in, because the women are so eager to pollute their womb and don't value their fertility that they just pump their bodies filled with intoxicants. And the men are more lazy because they want to get high all the time. They want to be lethargic. They want something easygoing. They don't know how to suffer or manage their emotions, except with, like, the way they manage their emotions is getting high. And they are too lazy to even work out. When people say, oh, smoking weed helps me to work out better, how can smoke help your lungs? And in the future, I bet you they're going to point out how many people got lung cancer from smoking endless blunts a day. Now, you right now may be tolerating a lot, but that's the thing, is when cancer strikes you down, you look back and say, dang, I really did play Russian roulette, didn't I? And so what I have noticed is people in America have a tendency to try to get wisdom from intoxicated minds. Now, in some of the videos I was looking at of the Babas and the people, the gurus peeps of India, they smoke ganja, so they're smoking weed all the time. They don't work. They have very strange things they do to themselves, and they just are mumbling and rambling and giving themselves an artificial state of schizophrenia. And so you can see that there's no wisdom to be had in the drunken mind. Now, Tim Cass has Ian Crossland on, and this guy is a typical American example of a drug addict. Someone who takes a lot of mushrooms, smokes a lot of weed, ecstasy, is constantly in a whirlwind within their own mind, and then they come out spewing nonsense that they think is some type of deep wisdom. Now, somebody who studies and learns and reflects and spends time in nature and really confronting their own self, and when anxiety and panic comes up, they breathe, they endure it, they are able to tame it down. Those are the ones, I believe, who actually gain some true insight into spirituality. But the people who are just smoking and drinking, their brains just like surfing. It's like, oh, we're gonna go here, we're gonna go there, and this makes them this sort of bipolar, schizophrenic, manic mess where time stops and they are they're not in the same mental dimension as you. Like when I argue, there's been a couple times in the past where I would argue with someone who's drunk. They're like really pissing me off, and you're like, listen, like I'm trying to do something, and then they're just like gone, and you're like, hey, but you can't argue with them because they're not there. And they don't even remember the next day what they said, and they look a fool, pissing themselves. It's just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And so we can see empirically, you don't become better with the more drinks you have. And it doesn't stop with just one drink. It usually progresses because your tolerance builds, and then it's like, oh, one drink, but it's 8.5% alcohol. You see what I'm trying to say? They go like, oh, it's only like this much alcohol, but then they're like, oh, I gotta get the edge off more, and then it's a slow creep. It's very sad, very sad. Hold on, I gotta pause. I'm getting a phone call. I'm gonna pause and then re-edit the video. Okay, sorry about that. So we can see clearly that wisdom is not to be had from the intoxicated mind. I constantly am stuck like with people who are heavily on drugs coming to me and telling me their ideas. And because I'm a philosopher, and there's a lot of occultists who they will come and spew their nonsense, their gematria, and I'm sober, right? I'm well read. I'm a complete nerd by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I value my brain. I don't need to be high. But I can see like the faults in their reasoning and the way they talk, and they're high, and so they get irritated with the way I exchange ideas with them, because I am able to point out holes like, okay, there's no evidence for this or no evidence for that, or maybe that's a good theory, but in Islam we believe this, and you press them and their brain can't compute because there's a fog there, there's a block there from the intoxicants. Intoxicants are like smudging feces on your car windshield and then trying to drive down the freeway. And then you turn on the windshield wipers and it's just spreading it everywhere. You can't, and then you press that button that sprays the water and it just makes it even more foggy on the windshield and all smeared poop. That is what intoxicants do to your mind. And American values are inflicting the brain with as much intoxicants as possible. And Christians, I had, this with my grandpa. I was talking to him not too long ago, where he said, Jesus drank wine, and they always use this excuse in order to facilitate the consumption of alcohol. That's one reason why I don't believe in Christianity. You cannot tell me that alcohol was made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the benefit and pleasure of humanity. Because if you drink it while pregnant, you harm your baby. Men who drink it, they cheat or they beat their wives. Women who drink it become hypersexual and worse parents. So no matter which way you square it, it damages the organs, your liver, your kidneys, and makes you less productive. Like, if you just stack up the net negatives and then compare the positives, you can clearly see it is not an elixir of life, but the devil's piss. And I really hope that more people become sober, because you are a weapon, you're a force. You are elite. If you are sober, you are better than those who get high and drunk and intoxicated. They can feel uncomfortable with this fact. But if you drive a car worse when high, you work worse while high, you're a worse parent when high, you have the red flags right in your face. And then when someone points this out, if you lash out at them and you just can't look in the black mirror, well, that's on you. It is very important for people to know that if you actually want to be formidable, you must be sober. You know how many politicians get themselves in trouble with drinking with someone? Women come in and then there's a secret camera and they get recorded doing something, and that's used as blackmail. Countless times people will reveal secrets. They'll engage in activities they weren't supposed to. It literally is intoxicants that ruin countless lives. And so the fact that people will be like, do you want a cocktail over a business meeting, or do you want a beer at the barbecue? Do you want beer at the Super Bowl? Taylor Swift was chugging beer at the Super Bowl, pushing that to her female fans. You have to ask yourself, what kind of government would push intoxicants on its people? It's usually a government that hates its own people. People who secretly almost want to practice a sort of eugenics program where you kill off as many people as possible via destroying their organs and giving them the tools to do this. And when you see how children suffer with alcoholic parents, how many people get drunk and go behind the wheel, how many people go in clubs, they get drunk and they fight each other and stab each other and ruin their lives. It's really quite sad. And so America values intoxicants. And so if America had Islam, we would practice more sobriety. The people would be stronger, faster. The children healthier. We would be elite. We would be a supreme class of human beings. And women make less mistakes when sober, when it comes to sexual deviancy. When women drink, oftentimes they become hypersexual. This is why when you do adult entertainment, you constantly say, oh, here, have a drink, you'll be less shy. Have a drink, you'll be less shy. Take a shot, you'll be less shy. Because it's an inhibitor to modesty. It makes you want to display yourself. It makes you more raunchy. And then in the morning you wake up, you realize what you did, and you feel dirty. In order to make that shame go away, you drink more in order to feel charismatic and bubbly and in the light. And so atheists, they do value intoxicants. They see nothing wrong with it. And then the pagans as well, both modern pagans and heathens, but people who are touching to the past with psychedelics and whatnot. And so Islam has a superior value of sobriety because it makes better humans. It makes better soldiers, makes better mothers, births healthier children, creates less childhood trauma, You spend less on the substance itself, and a lot of accidents are avoided, a lot of regrets are avoided. And so if America started to ban all alcohol advertisements on regular old school TV, on social media, you would probably see the numbers start to decrease. Banning it from being sold at gas stations, banning it in more places, the desire to go to get that stuff would be less. Now, when people say, well, if you ban alcohol, people will just make it in their bathtub and they'll get sick. That's their problem. That's their problem. Why should you allow a liquid to be sold that harms more people than helps? Just because some moron wants to play chemistry in their bathtub. Oh, if you don't let people have professional meth labs, they'll blow up their trailers. No, that's not how we're going to play this game. America needs to look itself in the mirror and ask, how has intoxicants ruined this nation? If you look at videos of how many homeless people are on drugs and how they're really ruining their lives, they all have childhood trauma, and that one of the people who traumatized them was also an addict, you see how addiction, intoxicants, harm society. And anyone advocating for the legalization of more intoxicants, well, they are your enemy. And I always bring this up, but I will not forget how my Democrat, liberal progressive professor of political science, when I was taking a class on the Constitution, had a conversation of we should legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs. And I said I prefer my mom to be dead or in prison than getting high. And she was offended, and so was everyone else in the class. I'm always the odd one out. I'm used to it. But it is a very dangerous thing for us to think that the secular liberal atheists, with their Western value of intoxication, are superior, because it is their fault why there's so much crime, why there's so much drugs, why there's so much bad health because of drug use, why there's so many kids with traumas, because they minimize the effects of intoxication, they enable the usage of it, they coddle the addicts and coddle the sellers, and they don't perpetuate a philosophy based on truth that helps people to overcome their weaker, baser points. And so they have an invested interest in pushing opioids and pushing SSRIs, and they invest in alcohol companies, and the fact that sports players who are athletes will take money from alcohol companies. Also, like Conor McGregor has his own crappy whiskey, and he drinks quite a lot, and he's not that good of a fighter anymore because he is always drunk, versus Habib, who is sober. You can see the difference. You can see how one man degrades himself and ruins his health and fighting power, and the other honors Allah and his commands, stays sober, and is more deadly. Okay? Now, drunkenness was not a huge thing in the 17th century. It wasn't as promoted. Yes, there was these little mini pubs, but the religiosity of the Christians was a little different back then. Women were not twerking and pouring champagne on their breasts and doing OnlyFans and other debaucheries. Sure, there might have been private parties and whatnot of the upper echelon of men in their private groups. And yes, there's like Greece with their strange wine Dionysus parties and stuff. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took down the Greek Empire. Now they're not really anything anymore. They had their Greek and Roman Empire, and he wiped them away, and now they're all ruins and just poor government with high unemployment and crime. Not really glorious anymore. And that's a sign for a people who reason. If your government promotes something, that means they value it. So if the marketing agencies are allowed to push intoxicants in all their forms, with big pharma lobbyists, alcohol sponsorships, and advertising, this then means America values the dulled mind more than the sharp mind. Okay? And Hollywood, constantly has to have shows where someone's doing coke. You know, someone's acting like Hunter Biden, right? People are really ruining themselves and debasing themselves with the more intoxicants they take. And men, when they're high, they'll get turned out. They'll start experimenting with their sexual deviancy more. And women will allow trains to be run on them. Either way you look at it, lust and that demonic sexual energy that isn't pure, that isn't life-forming, comes in through the intoxicants. It just opens the door, and it's like this horrific, poisonous cloud that permeates the atmosphere and puts everyone into a stupor and makes them have some of the worst traumatic memories of their lives. And it's important for people to learn how to have fun while sober, how to be enthusiastic while sober, how to endure sadness and depression and loneliness while sober, how to endure pain from death, right, or something in the family, a loss, while sober. And so America needs Islam, because Islam will make people more sober. Now, the heroin trade is something that is pushed. That's a weapon. So in Afghanistan had the poppy fields, and then the Taliban burned it, and people were very upset, and U.S. soldiers were guarding poppy fields, while in America locking people up for cannabis and possession of meth and possession of heroin itself. Then you can see that the government is not a moral agent, but rather something that serves something other than the Most High. Our money says under God, but it doesn't specify which God when you think about it. And so, even in the Christian conservative influencers online, there's alcohol. The Daily Wire, smoking cigars, they have a different alcohol, and they're all sitting around in the smoking room. Andrew Clavin, Ben Shapiro, those types are sitting around ingesting intoxicants. Those are for the conservatives. Country music itself constantly has intoxicants. Kid Rock, who got mad at Bud Light for having a cross-dresser on their promotions on TikTok. Dylan Mulvaney, he is someone who endorses a lot of alcohol use. So no matter which influencer you look at, few of them who are famous on the Twitter sphere or on YouTube call to sobriety. So that even the Christian conservatives consume intoxicants. Islam has the true form of conservatism, the true form of religiosity. Women have to learn how to unwind and cope with stress in healthier ways. I grew up around a lot of alcoholics. My parents were drug addicts. I can tell you that didn't make them powerful. It did not make them better parents. And people will rationalize themselves into the pits of addiction. They have one beer, well, it's just one. Oh, it's just this. Oh, now it's two. Now it's stronger in potency. Now it's beer and cigarettes. Now it's beer, cigarettes, and pills. The amount of people in my life who have overdosed and died, or have gotten liver cancer and liver failure, is quite high. And so it's a sensitive spot for me, because American culture has pushed intoxicants on its people. And in all sorts of movies, from the Seth Rogen types pushing cannabis to John Wayne types pushing whiskey, you see, and pushing Jack Daniels and these types of intoxicants, that we're not a very healthy, strong society. The crying cowboy with a bottle in his hand, and the gangster cholo with a 24-pack standing in front of his yard in Oakland, to the upper echelon turtleneck wearing liberal sipping on Cabernet Sauvignon, no matter, and then further, the business corporate woman drinking a dry martini in New York. Like, you have the stereotypes already there of every culture, and that is quite sad, and that shows you how far we've fallen. And a nation cannot be powerful if all its people are addicted to something. Think about how these minds would snap when they are no longer able to get their high. So America is actually quite weak, because if you have another plague that comes in, right, that's actually serious, or a cyber attack or something of this nature, and supply chains for drugs of all kinds were cut off and alcohol production had to cease, and people had to withdraw and be sober and deal with their mental problems, you would actually have to fear your fellow citizens more than the foreigner who's trying to occupy you. Really examine that. So, your neighbor who's a crystal meth addict, they can't get that itch anymore, and now their personality disorder is full blown, and they're rampaging, and they're all whiny and bitchy. That's a threat. The amount of people who take their anger out on their kids because they can't drink or get high is quite high. And so many people who are on Adderall and Ritalin and different psychotropic drugs that alter your consciousness state, who have forgotten what it's like to be raw in reality, they can't get their prescription filled. You're in a wartime. They're losing it. They're going batshit crazy. You have to feel your neighbor, your fellow citizen, more than the foreign invader. The foreign invader has a weapon, but your neighbor will tear you apart in order to get what they need, in order to barter something for the remaining drugs. That's another thing people forget. An alcoholic will drink mouthwash in order to get drunk, and rubbing alcohol. They will seek out things to get drunk, and they will make their own alcohol, and they don't care. They're lost in the sauce. So the drug cartels in a time of war would make triple the money because the production would cease traditionally, and then you would see the mass smuggling of intoxicants, and since jobs would be scarcer, robbing would become higher so that people could get the resources they need in order to get high. So I hope you understand what I'm saying. America has made its people sick, lethargic, and weak, and mentally ill and broken with the intoxicant culture. So therefore, in a time of war, where people can't get that dopamine hit, they can't just be laying around getting high, now you're going to see people's true nature come out, and they haven't dealt with their disorders, they haven't dealt with their trauma. Now you're going to have more threats from within rather than out. And if you've seen people withdraw from drugs, it's pretty brutal. And the drug addict mindset is like a sketchy, flaky, unsafe expression of being. When you're operating with someone who will lie and tell you anything to get money, you're in a low trust society. America is a low trust society because we have everyone on intoxicants. They're only as loyal as they are high. And once they can't get high, now you'll see that tongue split and sing any type of song to get high. Take a look at the crystal meth addicts, what they do to their own children while high. How they scratch themselves, itch themselves. In a time of war, they ain't gonna fight the invader. they're not healthy to be conscripted into the domestic military. They're gonna be like cockroaches scurrying through the ruins, trying to find somebody who can sell them their next hit. And they'll stay like that. Few people can snap out of the crystal meth addiction. And other drugs are similar. And we should think about what kind of nation have the secular liberal atheists created. Oops, that's the mechanic. Gotta go, fam. He's gonna fix the heater. See you next time. There you go.